The calendar has turned, but the conflict has only escalated. 2025 was the rehearsal. 2026 is the reality. This is Neural Pulse. Welcome to the 2026 Blueprint. Our mission today is to give you that survival map for the year ahead. We're going to be dissecting the structural shifts that really define the end of 2025. We've moved beyond this idea of managed conflict. We are now in an era of unpredictable escalation.
And that escalation, that unpredictability, it's all captured in one single massive contradiction we saw closing out the year, a concept we have to call the disconnect.
You disconnect.
Yes. On the surface, you had equity markets, the S&P 500, the Nikkei hitting all-time highs, all driven by this AI narrative. But at the exact same time, every single serious geopolitical risk indicator was flashing bright red, a total red alert.
It's an incredible level of cognitive dissonance. The idea that one sector's future can be completely unchanged from global stability.
Yeah.
So let's start where that friction is hottest. Eurasia. Because the end of the year saw a piece of pure information warfare.
Right. The war isn't just kinetic anymore. It hasn't been for a while. The real prize now is controlling the narrative to dictate the terms of peace.
And we saw that play out, almost perfectly between December 29th and 30th. Russia put out a claim that they'd intercepted this massive Ukrainian drone swarm. The number they cited was 91 UAVs, all supposedly targeting President Putin's Valdai residence.
Well, and that number, 91, is the key. Because the initial reports were much smaller. 41 drones, they said, near the residence. The number was then inflated. They retrospectively bundled in completely separate interceptions some hundreds of miles away in places like Bryansk. This wasn't an operational report, it was narrative construction.
So it was a lie built on a kernel of truth. And the intelligence backs that up. The CIA concluded Ukraine did not target the residents. This was, by all accounts, a textbook Russian false flag. But why then? Why the dramatic lie at that specific moment?
The timing is everything. It came right after that very sensitive meeting between Trump and Zelensky on the 28th. Russia had two goals here. First, sow immediate distrust in Kyiv's leadership, just as diplomacy was getting traction. And second, to paint Ukraine as a terror state, aiming for a head of state. To poison the well for any future peace talks.
And that pressure on Kyiv to compromise was already immense. We know the U.S. was using some pretty intense leverage, including a brief halt to military and intelligence support right before that meeting. This really confirms our Rule 1. Peace is coercion.
It is. It's a very harsh calculation. Leverage isn't just what you give, it's what you can take away. And the talks went even further. They started discussing conditions, like Ukraine sharing revenue from its mineral and rare earth deposits in exchange for U.S. security guarantees.
So it's not an alliance, it's a transaction. Security for resources.
Precisely.
And that same principle, using force to achieve economic ends, was happening in our own hemisphere. Let's pivot to the Caribbean. Operation Southern Spear.
This is a truly remarkable concentration of force. We're looking at the largest U.S. military presence in that region since 1962, since the Cuban Missile Crisis.
The USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group, over 15,000 personnel. This isn't just a patrol.
No. This is what we have to define as kinetic coercion.
And what's the specific strategy here against Venezuela?
It's economic strangulation behind a legal shield. The Pentagon is very, very careful to call it a quarantine.
Not a blockade.
Exactly. A blockade has clear implications under international law as an act of war. A quarantine, that's a legal gray area. It lets them apply continuous kinetic pressure without triggering a full international incident.
And that pressure became very real. In late December, we saw the first direct strike on Venezuelan soil. A CIA drone attack on coastal port facilities.
And those weren't random targets. They were hitting drug storage sites used by the Tren de Aragua group, which is, deeply tied into the regime's black market revenue.
So they're surgically cutting off the illicit cash flow.
And the effect on Venezuela's main lifeline oil has been immediate. Production in the Orinoco Belt is down between 15 and 25%.
How does stopping ships from leaving cause production to fall?
It's simple logistics. If you can't load the oil onto tankers, your onshore storage tanks fill up. Once they're full, you have no choice. You have to shut down the wells. The U.S. is using military power to turn off the tap on the regime's revenue.
Okay, so that's the military pressure. But to really get the whole picture, we need to look at the financial markets, where that disconnect we mentioned becomes impossible to ignore.
Right. It's like two different realities. In one, you have the S&P up 16.4%, the NASDAQ up over 20%, all based on the idea that AI can grow no matter what else is happening.
But then you look at the flight to safety. Gold.
Yeah.
It ended the year at $4,315 an ounce.
That's a 65% surge in a single year. I mean, that kind of move in a core reserve asset is a massive red flag if you think the rest of the economy is healthy.
It's a huge anomaly. So who's buying that much gold and why?
And that's the key strategic insight. This is what we're calling the Great Unwind. It's not just a hedge. It represents a deep systemic distrust in the dollar-based financial system itself, a loss of faith in the stability of SWIFT, of the entire infrastructure.
So this is capital preparing for a potential fracture, a real break in the global financial system.
Precisely. A hedge against a major global war or a full geopolitical collapse. Capital is saying the foundation itself is shaking. And what's even stranger is that this risk isn't hitting all commodities the same way.
No, not at all. WTI crude actually dropped 20%, down to $57 a barrel, despite all this tension.
Which tells you two things. Record U.S. production is a factor, but so is cooling demand from China. The global supply chain is completely fractured and regionalized now.
And that split is mirrored in the real economy. We saw corporate bankruptcies hit their highest levels since 2010.
The middle of the economy is getting crushed, but there's a psychological indicator here too.
You mean the luxury goods market?
Yes. Stocks like LVMH, Burberry, they slumped badly. And it's not just China. It's a strategic shift among the wealthy in the West towards what's being called stealth wealth.
Quiet luxury.
It's a conscious reduction in showing off your wealth, and it signals two things. Real economic anxiety, even at the very top, and a desire for a lower profile in unstable times. That's almost more unnerving than a market drop.
That anxiety feels like a good pivot point to Asia, where the structural ruptures are taking on a new military character. China is trying to rewrite the rules of engagement.
Their big exercise, Justice Mission 2025, was huge on paper, 130 aircraft, 14 ships. But the real story wasn't the hardware. It was the specific tool they chose to use.
The China Coast Guard, the CCG, they ran these so-called inspection drills near Taiwan.
And you have to frame this as lawfare. What China is doing is attempting to transform a military blockade into what they can claim is a domestic police action.
If it's the CCG and not the PLA Navy, they can argue it's not an act of war.
Exactly. It's an attempt to create a legal gray zone that allows them to strangle the island without triggering a full-blown international military response.
Which forced a major reaction in Tokyo. Prime Minister Takaichi finally ditched Japan's strategic ambiguity. She said, flat out, that an invasion of Taiwan could justify a Japanese military response. That's a fundamental shift.
And the economic chill was immediate. A huge Japanese business delegation to China was canceled, and this is now hitting home. The Bank of Japan had to raise its policy rate to 0.75%, the highest since 1995, just to manage inflation. Geopolitics is setting domestic interest rates.
That same pattern, regional instability driving everything, is clear in the Middle East, just with a much higher volume of violence. The IDF just released their year-end data, roughly 20,900 attacks across 7 different theaters in 2025.
And while the vast majority of those, about 93%, were in Gaza, you can't lose sight of the strategic depth here. The 1,500 strikes against Iran proper during that 12-day war in June. That's the critical piece. They killed 11 nuclear scientists and 30 senior officers. It was a severe blow to Iran's capabilities.
And that blow leads directly to the biggest risk for 2026, Iran's own internal stability. What happens when a weakened regime starts to implode from within?
The situation inside Iran is deteriorating very, very quickly. We're seeing large-scale anti-government protests in Tehran, outbursts, and this isn't political. This is driven by pure economic despair. The currency has collapsed.
So if the leadership can't fix the economy and they can't stop the protests, the fear is they might do something desperate. What's the real risk of a diversionary war to rally support?
It's a high volatility trigger. They could attempt one last major missile strike on Israel, even with their degraded capacity. The regime's calculus shifts from strategic defense to its own survival. A war could, they might think, unite the public against an external enemy, at least for a while.
Let's close out on the digital battlefield, because a vulnerability there can cause just as much disruption. The big threat at the end of the year was in MongoDB.
Yes, Mongo bleed. CVE 2025-14847. To put it simply for you, this is a terrifyingly effective flaw. It allows an attacker to just read data straight out of a server's memory, no password needed. It's like leaving the front door unlocked on about 87,000 servers globally.
A massive breach of trust in the infrastructure. And we saw this play out in the real world. Ransomware hit the Swedish power grid operator and healthcare providers in the US and India.
A digital attack is now a standard tool of kinetic coercion. It's meant to cause maximum economic and social pain. But what's really interesting is the defensive model we're seeing from authoritarian states.
You mean Russia saying they might just shut off mobile internet in Moscow to stop drones?
Yes, it sets a terrifying precedent. It's this willingness to sacrifice civil liberties on a massive scale for security. It's a digital iron curtain model that you can be sure other states are watching very closely. So the environment we've laid out, it confirms that 2026 is going to be defined by a failure of stable deterrence. We're in an era of uncoordinated multipolarity. The old rules are gone.
So to synthesize this into the blueprint, you need to be watching three critical trigger points.
Mhm.
Three things that could cause a rapid escalation.
The first is Venezuela. We have to watch the endurance limit of the Maduro regime under this quarantine. The moment their revenue runs out, they could choose lashing out over collapsing inward. The second is Taiwan. The risk of an accidental collision as China uses its coast guard for these lawfare blockades is astronomical. One inspection that goes wrong could trigger an unbelievable escalation. And the third is Iran. The leadership's decision on nuclear breakout. As the protests and economic collapse continue, do they make a final dash for the bomb, betting that it's the only thing that guarantees their survival? The blueprint is set. The rest is up to you. Stay sharp, stay hidden. See you in the trenches.